Okay, yes. So as Maria said, I'm Walter Reed. Inversion. I feel very fortunate because I've had the privilege of being on Kaggle as a competitor for 5 years, and now on the Kaggle data science team, the competition team for 5 years. So I've got to see both sides. It's just been a wonderful community. It's grown so much over the 10 years that I joined Kaggle, and every day it's just a marvel to be a part of this wonderful community. So this is a presentation that our new CEO gave in Barcelona 2 weeks ago that I stole, crossed out his name, put mine in there. He had a family picture to introduce himself. I took the family picture off because I thought that would be a little bit weird. But this is very much the same talk that Dee gave. So I want to introduce you to Dee. So yeah, about close to a year ago, many of you know Anthony Goldblum, the founder and CEO of Kaggle. He decided that, after a dozen plus years at Kaggle, he was going to move on and do a new startup. And so they began looking for a replacement for the CEO of Kaggle. And they wanted somebody that was very well versed in machine learning, somebody who knew Kaggle, appreciated Kaggle, and as well as somebody that fit the Kaggle culture. And it was quite a difficult search to find a new CEO. But they found Dee Scully. Dee has been at Google for 14 years. And it is just Dee. That is his name, Dee period. You got to put the period. Yeah, not sure exactly why. But Dee has been working in machine learning he's been at Google for 14 years. He's done all sorts of wonderful things. Just published a book, Reliable Machine Learning, if you're interested in that. Yeah, Dee's also published a lot of cutting edge methods in machine learning. But he's also, interestingly enough, published a number of papers critical of the state of machine learning and data science. So he's very much aware of the industry and the trends in the industry. If you look at that paper that has that red arrow, so about 7 years ago, there was this paper published, and it was Follow the Regularized Leader, FTRL. Very interesting algorithm. And about 7 years ago, when this paper was published, there's a Kaggler who discovered the paper, wrote an implementation in Python. It became very, very popular. And 2 weeks ago, when Dee was presenting this, I'm like, wait, you published that paper? I was, because I was one of the Kagglers who used the code and was very interested. So if you haven't looked up that paper and the Follow the Regularized Leader, FTRL paper, it's very interesting. So yeah, Dee is quite well versed in machine learning. So I want to talk a little bit about why Kaggle is so amazing. Now, we know Kaggle is amazing because we have an amazing community, people that are willing to share, people that are kind to each other. Even in a competitive environment, they're willing to share their tips and tricks. We know that. I want to talk a little bit something maybe that might surprise you of why Kaggle is so amazing. So first of all, if you think how much our industry has grown over the last few years, this is the number of papers that are submitted to the NeurIPS conference by year. So do you realize almost 10,000 papers are submitted to NeurIPS conference? How do you keep up with what's important? There's 10,000 papers. How do you know what works? How do you know what doesn't work? So the industry has had tremendous growth, which is fantastic, but it also has some downsides. Fun little tangent. So this is Stable Diffusion. I put in Happy Kaggler sitting in a conference room listening to Walter speak, and this is what it came up with. If this is what Stable Diffusion thinks happy Kagglers are, I would hate to see what it would think unhappy Kagglers would be. So by show of hands, who's heard of Stable Diffusion? Yeah, almost everybody. Okay, who's heard of Stable Diffusion 6 months ago? Just a few, right? So something that's absolutely amazing and everyone's talking about, we didn't know about, or very few of us knew about 6 months ago. So that's really an indication of how fast things are changing. So because of that, it brings in some biases in machine learning. And I'm not talking about the biases that we talk about social and racial and gender biases. I'm not talking about that, but biases that creep in just because of the state of the way things are. And the first one is novelty bias. So what do we mean by novelty bias? We over-index on things that are new and cool and Stable Diffusion, and right? Yeah, so all of those 10,000 papers that are submitted to NeurIPS every year, they all are a new method. Everyone wants to publish on a new method. Well, okay, that's great. How do you know if the old methods are working? How do you know what, if any, of the old methods are the best to use on your particular problem. So you can imagine in healthcare, right? All of us are consumers of healthcare. They also publish in healthcare. Could you imagine if they only published new things in healthcare, if they weren't ever evaluating, you know, current methods, right? That would be a problem for us as the consumers of healthcare. We want research on existing methods, but we bias, right? We bias towards novelty. We bias towards positive results. You know, you get a 1% improvement in the benchmark and okay, you can publish your paper. Well, 100,000 papers, 1% improvement, does that mean we're improving 100%, 100,000% a year? No, no, we're not. But we have this bias of just, we only publish the things that show an improvement. But that means there's a lot we're throwing away that we're learning that we don't share. But by the way, I'll talk about that in a second. So single benchmark bias. Who's heard of ImageNet? Everyone's heard of ImageNet, right? When you have a single canonical benchmark that everyone's publishing against, that tends to introduce bias in what algorithms rise to the top and what algorithms we use. Resource bias. This is a challenging one. Much of the current machine learning requires huge amount of resources to be successful. So what that means is organizations or labs that have these huge resources are the ones that tend to get the results published. That means these ideas are coming from a small subset of people. And then fashion bias. So a story that Dee shared when he was on stage in Barcelona, when he started his PhD research in 2002, his advisor told him, do not ever mention neural networks in a paper or it will not get published. So he said, don't mention neural networks. 2 years later, of course, you had to mention neural networks to get published. So our industry follows trends of what's fashionable. And that's not a great thing either necessarily, because it just means, okay, everyone follows the buzzwords versus what follows what was truly most effective for the problem that we're working on. So, you know, I've always laughed at people that point to the screen when they do the clicker, and here I am pointing to the screen where the laptop's over there. So what would it take to address these issues? Well, what if we had a large community of passionate, motivated people, not necessarily tied to academic incentives, thousands of groups, each independently approaching the same problem, results based on objective criteria, failure as well as successes documented and shared, and lessons learned distilled and shared for all to benefit from. That kind of sounds like Kaggle, doesn't it? Right? And that is what makes Kaggle an amazing place. It's a place where we can really take the things that are published or the things that we come up with and put them through a test, find out what works, find out what doesn't work, and share those for all the benefit. So it's an amazing place. So just want to talk really quickly about some things that are underway at Kaggle under Dee's leadership. So number one is he really wants to promote knowledge sharing. You have people after a competition share, you know, here's what worked, here's what didn't work. But we are looking on ways both in our design and other incentives to accelerate the amount of knowledge sharing that happens within Kaggle so that a competition doesn't happen and it kind of drifts away. It's like an iceberg that breaks off and floats away and all of that knowledge is lost. We really want to do a better job of capturing and curating that knowledge. Increasing resources, you may have noticed in Kaggle notebooks, there was a recent memory increase and additional availability in TPUs, so that's something that benefits everybody. Pushing forward competition formats. This is one that personally causes me pain because, as we try new things that are new and different, there's a lot we have to think about. So we anticipate we may stumble a few times. If you remember early Kaggle, there were a lot more competitions that were launched with leakage, and so we're going to have to work through this, but we do anticipate we'll have competitions that are new, different, outside the norm. Working to increase and improve incentives. You will notice over time that the prize funds for competition increases over time, so I think that will be welcome for everyone, giving more money to all of the hard work and recognizing all of the hard work in the community. Active moderation efforts to keep the community healthy and inclusive. I believe we have an absolutely fantastic community, but there are some things we can do to make it even better. And also programs to help improve representation across Kaggle to make sure everyone that wants to be there is there and feels welcome and included. So with that, Kaggle continues to grow. We have over 11 million registered users, over 170,000 public data sets, largest high-quality data set repository in the world, tens of thousands of shared models, and over 600,000 shared notebooks. And this is all because of you. So from Kaggle, and from my heart, thank you so much for being part of this amazing community and sharing so much with everyone else. Thank you.